On March 7, 1945, atop the ridges above Remagen, Germany, Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Enderman lifted his binoculars with steady hands, not shaken by terror, but by sheer astonishment. Amid the midday mist, he saw a sight that upended every military strategy they'd clung to for the previous half-year. The bridge remained intact, just one bridge, the sole crossing. From the Rhine to the Elbe, every German leader had gotten strict directives to obliterate all spans at the first sign of Allied approach. But there it was, the Ludendorff Bridge, its paired stone pillars standing tall like tributes to Teutonic ingenuity, its iron framework stretching across the Rhine's 300-meter width, the river that formed Germany's ultimate barrier against westward assaults. Beside Enderman, Lieutenant Karl Timberman voiced the idea destined to resonate down the ages. We've got to seize it immediately before they send it crashing into oblivion. In that instant, none of them grasped how securing this lone edifice would unleash the greatest tactical unraveling in the annals of German warfare, a mental shattering of Nazi fortification principles so profound that officers afterward called it the instant they realized beyond doubt the conflict was doomed. The equation of this turning point unfolded not through the sacrifice of troops, but via the stark logic of battlefield positioning. The Rhine wasn't simply a waterway, it was a 300-meter bulwark, its rapid flow capable of flipping landing craft, its depths prone to swallowing tanks, and its sheer banks ready to ensnare foot soldiers. Ever since Roman troops first scanned its banks toward the ancient German woods, the Rhine had served as the heartland's classic shield from Western incursions. By March 1945, it embodied Hitler's ultimate gambit for stalling, either to negotiate a distinct truce with the Western powers or to shift units from the crumbling East for a final defense. The sight of one undamaged span would demolish those plans in under 10 minutes of fighting. The groundwork for this disaster had been laid well before. Hitler's final big push in the West, the Battle of the Bulge, wrapped up in ruin by the end of January 1945. German media had touted it as a game-changing pushback, yet it had devoured the Wehrmacht's remaining fast-moving units. Roughly 100,000 German losses, 600 tanks lost, and the permanent depletion of seasoned panzer outfits had reduced the forces on the Rhine's western side to mere shadows of their prior might. Come early March, 12 U.S. divisions were closing in on the river across a line from the Netherlands to Switzerland. The German 15th Army, tasked with guarding the vital stretch from Cologne to Koblenz, could barely field 50,000 battle-ready men against an enemy fivefold stronger. The bridge held its own cruel twist that both sides recognized all too well. Honoring General Erich Ludendorff, the sharp-minded yet ultimately foiled World War I tactician, it had been erected from 1916 to 1919 largely by Russian captives under harsh duress. Those laborers had built their span with unintended durability, iron beams meant to support trains brimming with war materiel. Stone bastions on either side housing 3 levels of fortifications, 4 enormous piers anchored firmly in the Rhine's foundation rock. The blueprints had included built-in explosive bays within the framework, spaces meant for charges to topple it before foes could claim it. Post-World War I French occupiers had sealed those bays with cement. Upon Hitler's 1936 reclamation of the Rhineland, engineers fitted 60 zinc-coated containers to the bridge's beams, each set for 3 kilon of blasting material. The setup aimed for instant activation, plunging the whole thing into the Rhine in moments. But destiny and Hitler's suspicions altered course in October 1944. A U.S. airstrike hit the Mülheim Bridge in Cologne, setting off its ready charges and wrecking it prematurely for the Germans. Hitler's fury erupted like a storm. He insisted on swift trials for the culpable officers and commanded that all Rhine Bridge explosives be pulled out and kept close by. Fresh rules allowed reinstallation only when Allies neared within 8 km, and demolition required a direct written command from area leaders. This approach spawned chaos for German commanders. Trigger it early and risk trial for wrecking essential escape paths. Delay too much and invite death for letting key assets slip to the enemy. The mental strain froze German choices just when bold moves were essential. The U.S. push to Remagen had been dubbed Operation Lumberjack. This seemingly understated endeavor evolved into one of the war's pivotal campaigns. Its key goals centered on seizing Cologne and Koblenz, historic urban centers that dominated essential Rhine River spans. Led by Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges, the U.S. First Army pushed forward into the Eifel area, confronting German opposition that had eroded from structured resistance to frantic stalling tactics. The Wehrmacht's leaders harbored no false hopes of halting the U.S. push. Their directives boiled down to postponing the inevitable, allowing additional forces to withdraw over the Rhine prior to the span's destruction. Spearheading the assault was Major General John Leonard's 9th Armored Division, known as the Phantom Division, after German scouts proclaimed it obliterated time and again, only for it to resurface shortly thereafter. On the misty morning of March 7th, fog shrouded the Rhine Valley. Disorder in the German High Command had escalated to a degree that would have seemed inconceivable for the 1940-era Wehrmacht. General Edwin von Rothkirchen, who oversaw the 53rd Corps guarding the Remagen zone, had unwittingly strayed into U.S. positions on March 6th and fallen into captivity. His successor, General Richard von Bothmer, proved unable to access Remagen as American troops had already severed the routes. At 1 a.m., on March 7th, General Otto Hitzfeld from the 67th Corps learned he was now tasked with protecting the Ludendorff Bridge, even though he was 64 kilometers distant and unfamiliar with the edifice. Hitzfeld promptly sent his aide, Major Hans Schell, to assume control of the bridge's safeguards. Schell set out at 3:00 a.m. alongside 8 soldiers and a communications device, aiming to rally fleeing detachments into a protective cordon. The trip devolved into a harrowing ordeal, marked by misguided paths, U.S. barriers, and gasoline deficits. The radio team got detached. Schell only reached Remagen at 11:15 a.m., mere hours shy of when U.S. units would scale the ridges above the settlement. Captain Willy Bruckner, the actual German officer on site in Remagen, oversaw a contingent that was more theoretical than tangible. Records showed a roster of 600 troops. In truth, his fighting strength amounted to 36 personnel, largely injured veterans, older reservists, or adolescent recruits from the Volkssturm. Numerous were Osttruppen, former Soviet captives who donned German garb to flee internment. Their dependability against U.S. attackers remained highly dubious. Bruckner had for weeks begged for backups, reliable radios, or any aid to secure a key asset that appeared neglected by superiors until U.S. silhouettes dotted the skyline. His appeals vanished amid the turmoil of a disintegrating hierarchy. The required demolition explosives, meant to be fixed in place on the bridge long ago, lingered in a local depot, pending instructions for deployment. When those directives arrived on March 6th, engineering personnel hastily positioned 2,800 kilon of charges into the piers and fastened 300 kilo-shaped explosives to vital supports. The U.S. advance on March 7th carried a touch of fortuitous fate. Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Engemann directed a column from the 9th Armored Division's Combat Command B, drawing from the 14th Tank Battalion and the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion. Their mission involved taking Remagen and then veering southward to connect with the Third Army. Finding a preserved bridge was the last thing anticipated. U.S. reconnaissance had verified that German sappers were methodically razing all Rhine crossings as Allied units neared. Aerial images captured the wreckage of spans at Bonn and Koblenz. The Ludendorff Bridge near Remagen ought to have been reduced to rubble days before. As Engemann's vanguard cleared the tree line above the town around 1:00 p.m., the panorama unfolding below bordered on the unbelievable. German army transports continued traversing the bridge. Local residents thronged the entryways. The framework remained whole, with its explosive packages plainly evident as shadowy fixtures on the girders. Lieutenant Karl Timmermann, a 22-year-old squad commander born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1922, who had moved to America as a baby with his family, spearheaded the charge. Fluent in German, he comprehended the gravity of their discovery more acutely than many. The bridge signified far beyond a mere pathway. It marked the collapse of the ultimate defense, the conclusive geographic hurdle surmounted not through overwhelming force, but via a blend of serendipity and Teutonic inertia. Brigadier General William Hoge, head of Combat Command B, reached the overlook around 2:45 p.m. He instantly recognized the broader ramifications. This wasn't just a pathway over the Rhine, it offered a golden opening to Hoger's bold choice, which would shape his legacy in the annals of warfare, propelled the operation 3 weeks beyond the Rhine, outpacing General Montgomery's carefully orchestrated plunder offensive set for the end of March. He resolved, "We're seizing that bridge immediately." The Nazi forces guarding it found themselves in an utterly disastrous strategic bind. Major Scheller had reached the bridge's outskirts barely 2 hours prior, drained from his harrowing trek and appalled by the scene before him. Captain Bratch delivered a rapid overview. Demolition setups, including electric triggers operated from the eastern tunnel portal, had primed the structure for destruction. A secondary mechanism relied on a hand-lit fuse. Defenses were virtually absent. The bulk of the soldiers Scheller had hoped to rally had either traversed the span or skirted Remagen altogether. The morning mist, which had shrouded everything, dissipated at the most inopportune instant, affording U.S. spotters flawless sightlines. Around 3:15 p.m., U.S. armored vehicles emerged on the town's western edge. The window for hesitation slammed shut. Capturing Remagen proper lasted under half an hour. Lieutenant John Grimball's unit of M26 Pershing tanks, the latest and heaviest in the American arsenal across Europe, spearheaded the push. These Pershings were so cutting-edge that few Wehrmacht personnel had encountered them. Equipped with 90mm cannons able to pierce any axis plating, they embodied yet another testament to U.S. manufacturing dominance. The vehicles unleashed white phosphorus projectiles to generate obscuring haze and pummeled enemy strongpoints with bursting ordnance. Timberman's foot soldiers trailed close, navigating avenues marred by prolonged Anglo-American air raids. Remagen had once been an idyllic riverside getaway prior to the conflict. Come March 1945, over 50% of its edifices lay in ruins. The handful of Teutonic troops resisting the incursion retreated swiftly. The majority bolted straight over the bridge. From his vantage near the bridge's western pylon, Captain Brad observed the Yankee surge and recognized the critical juncture. At 3:20, he commanded the detonation of the western entry ramp. The blast carved a 3-meter-wide chasm, blocking direct tank passage onto the span, yet the core framework endured intact. The contest for the crossing distilled into a frantic sprint of moments and distances. U.S. tanks maneuvered to the western terminus, their 90mm barrels relentlessly pounding German emplacements atop the eastern ridges. The Erl, a 180-meter basalt escarpment on the far shore, teamed with Luftwaffe flak batteries, their muzzles now tilted downward to strafe the advancing GIs directly. Roughly 120 troops from A Company, 27th Armored Infantry Battalion under Timberman, started crossing the bridge near 3:50. They progressed in brief dashes, huddling behind the span's masonry pillars and barriers for protection. From the eastern abutments and dugouts at the tunnel's far end, German automatic weapons erupted. Projectiles bounced wildly from metal and rock, weaving a lethal barrage. A number of Yanks dropped in the opening volley. The survivors pressed onward. Observing from the eastern tunnel's threshold, Major Scheller confronted the pivotal call facing any Reich officer that day. The bridge brimmed with charges. The wired ignition stood primed. Enemy infantry had traversed more than half the length. All training, all tactical tenets urged instant obliteration. Yet moments before, Lieutenant Carl Peters from the flak unit had implored him urgently. Peters oversaw a section armed with the classified Henschel HS-2 rocket array, a revolutionary device launching 24 swift anti-aircraft missiles with remarkable precision. His outfit remained stranded on the western flank. Peters refused to surrender such vital gear to the foe. Scheller consented to hold off. That choice sealed his fate. Captain Karl Fezenhan, the sapper charged with the blasts, stationed himself by the electric switch in the tunnel's entrance. Once Peters' detachment had finally traversed, Scheller signaled Zenon. Near Vorrücken, as U.S. forces reached 2/3 across, Zenon engaged the circuit. Silence followed. The power link had malfunctioned. An incoming round had probably severed the cables sometime earlier, though the precise reason stayed forever unclear. Sergeant Alex Drabick, a 34-year-old native of Toledo, Ohio, emerged as the initial U.S. serviceman to touch the Rhine's eastern shore since Napoleon's forces had forded it westward more than 100 years prior. Trailing him, Timberman and his company's remainder surged forward. Sapper Sergeant Eugene Dorland, along with his squad, methodically severed every cable in sight, hurrying to neutralize the leftover charges before the opposing sappers could trigger the manual fallback. Corporal Anton Faustst, a Wehrmacht demolition specialist, enlisted in a high-stakes operation out of sheer necessity. He bolted from the passage, sprinted about 100 meters amid intense enemy fire, and manually lit the secondary detonator. The blast, erupting around 4:15, rippled through the framework. The span rose a few inches from its supports before dropping back into place. Clouds of dust and wreckage clouded the sky. U.S. troops atop the crossing tumbled onto the surface. Yet, as the haze dissipated, the framework endured. The primary iron spans suffered harm but stayed whole. The 6-inch dip in the roadway remained passable. The crossing endured. The contest concluded. The U.S. forces prevailed. The moments right after turned into organized turmoil, guided by discipline and resolve. U.S. field engineers rushed the span, laboring urgently to dismantle leftover explosives and fix the harm to the access ramp. Lieutenant Colonel Harvey Fraser's 27th Armored Infantry Battalion started setting up a protective line on the eastern bank, stretching out from the passage opening over the hills of the Eppley. German opposition crumbled with astonishing speed. Captain Bratta and the bulk of his surviving soldiers sought refuge in the 400-meter rail passage tunneling under the Lay. By 5:30 p.m., Lieutenant Timon and his team controlled the passage entry and took hundreds of captives, many grateful their conflict had ended. Major Scheller reached a deadly choice driven by panic. Aware the crossing was gone and that he held official blame for its protection, he seized a bike and pedaled eastward to reach his unit's base and recount the events. 4 days on, authorities would detain him, try him in a military court, and shoot him by squad as the fall guy for a debacle with many culprits. Word of the span's seizure raced through the U.S. command structure like lightning. Around 5, Brigadier General Hoger sent a message via radio to his division head, Major General John Leonard, delivering news both accurate and astonishing. "We captured the bridge. Leonard passed it along right away to 1st Army Base." Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges was in talks with his aides when the message arrived. Eyewitnesses noted Hodges snatched the phone so fast he spilled his coffee. Soon enough, he connected with 12th Army Group's leader, General Omar Bradley. Bradley sat in session with his planning chief, Major General Harold Bull, when a staffer broke in with a pressing alert. "Brad, we've secured a bridge," Hodges declared, his tone buzzing with thrill. "A bridge? Do you mean you've kept one hole over the Rhine?" Bradley inquired, rising from his chair. "Yes." Leonard grabbed one at Reagan just before they could destroy it. Bradley's reply echoed through the upper U.S. ranks as unforgettable. "Hot dog, Courtney, this will crack him apart. Are you moving your gear over?" "As quickly as we can shove it across," Hodges answered. Bradley wasted no time phoning Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower at his base in Rouen, France. Eisenhower understood the weight at once. The seizure marked what he afterward called one of those uncommon and brief chances that sometimes emerge in battle and, if seized, can profoundly shape later triumphs. Eisenhower's initial strategy envisioned Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's 21st Army Group conducting the key Rhine traversal near Wessel in late March, backed by detailed paratroop drops and heavy cannon barrages. The Casse-Vuetze effort was meant to play a supporting role, more limited, precisely timed. The Remagen Bridge upended it all. Eisenhower directed Bradley to press the foothold without delay. All spare forces were to reroute to Remagen. In mere hours, the tactical emphasis across the whole Western Front pivoted southward. The German reply highlighted leadership gridlock and brutal blame-shifting. When the report hit Adolf Hitler at his Berlin command post, his reaction blended tactical hopelessness with lethal fury. Hitler had held on to ever more fanciful dreams that the Rhine would grant him space to arrange a distinct truce with the Western powers. Germany's whole defense plan in the West depended on the waterway as an obstacle for rebuilding broken units and shifting them anew. A preserved U.S. foothold 3 weeks early shattered that approach. Hitler's first move was to single out culprits for punishment and death. He called in General Lieutenant Rudolf Hübner, a die-hard Nazi famed for his brutality from the Eastern Theater. Hübner received charge of a mobile ad hoc tribunal, tasked with judging and putting to death the leaders who let the bridge fall. The tribunal served as a sham of justice, essentially a roving kill team dressed in legal garb. Hübner traveled with 2 lieutenant colonels, along with 2 military police personnel, acting as the execution detail. Not one of the tribunal members possessed any background in law. Hubner outright dismissed proposals to supply German military justice codes, insisting that he required no guidance beyond Hitler's direct command. Field Marshal Gerhard von Rundstedt, the high-born leader of Germany's Western forces, found himself ousted from his role on March 10th. Hitler's deepening suspicions called for a high-profile figure to bear the blame. Rundstedt's successor became Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, rushed over from overseeing troops in Italy. Kesselring stood out as a skilled expert in defensive maneuvers, earning the nickname of Hitler's crisis resolver for his talent in restoring order amid chaos. Yet Kesselring quickly saw that the Remagen crisis defied any attempt at recovery. He afterward labeled the bridge's fall as the Remagen outrage, explaining how it shattered the defensive line along the Rhine and rendered prolonged resistance unfeasible. Hermann Göring, head of the crumbling Luftwaffe, offered a sharper critique. He remarked that seizing the bridge eliminated any chance for extended resistance. The fallout reached far deeper than mere statements. Officers in the German ranks who had clung to faint prospects of securing the Rhine now grasped that the conflict was nearing its endgame. The ad hoc tribunal launched into its grim operations with ruthless speed. Major General Richard von Bothmer, nominally in charge of the Bonn-Remagen area though he never made it to the span, faced trial on March 9th. Found guilty of neglecting his responsibilities, he got stripped to enlisted rank and handed a 5-year jail term. Von Bothmer, grieving the loss of his spouse and his son's wartime death, seized a sidearm from a tribunal aide and took his own life right there in the chamber on March 10th. By March 11th, the tribunal reached Field Marshal Model's Army Group B base. That session saw 4 officers judged in sessions barely topping 60 minutes apiece. Major Hans Scheller earned a guilty verdict for not destroying the bridge, even though he showed up just 2 hours prior to the U.S. assault and exhausted every feasible option amid dire odds. Lieutenant Karl Peters stood condemned for letting his hidden rocket unit get seized by Americans, despite begging for extra moments to relocate his gear. Majors August Kraft and Herbert Strobel, the battlefield sappers who had set the initial explosives days before and sat 60 kilometers distant during the takeover, got convicted for inadequate setup of the blasting apparatus. Each received a capital sentence. The killings occurred on March 14, 1945, amid woodlands close to the hamlets of Rimbach and Oberwester. The quartet of officers was marched into the trees, made to drop to their knees, and dispatched with shots to the nape. Their remains went into anonymous ditches scraped where they dropped. Captain Willie Bratfish, who truly oversaw the bridge's protection and outdid all others in readying its destruction, underwent a trial without his presence and drew a death penalty too. Yet Bratfish already languished in U.S. captivity, nabbed in the underpass on March 7th. Captain Carl Frings, the sapper who truly tried igniting the charges, also remained under American guard. Frings faced an in absentia hearing and got cleared, marking an uncommon flash of sound judgment amid the farce. Field Marshal Model himself approved the killings and directed that reports of them circulate to all German outfits as a stark alert. The intent shone through plainly. Any shortfall would invite execution, no matter the context. As those German leaders met their ends over the span's forfeiture, U.S. units streamed over it in swelling waves hour by hour. The structure endured but showed evident harm. Sappers toiled non-stop to reinforce frail spots and fix the entryway. An engineer outfit installed illumination for after-dark movement. MPs guided the surge of soldiers and machinery. In the first full day post-seizure, over 8,000 U.S. personnel had advanced to the foothold on the far shore. Armored platoons, gun units, foot soldiers companies, all surging via the sole undamaged Rhine, crossing from Switzerland to the North Sea. Still, the Americans sensed the original could give way any time. Sapper teams kicked off building interim spans right away. Come March 9th, 2 days after the grab, the initial floatway stood ready, an M2 treadway of aluminum alloy, positioned slightly north of the Ludendorff. Efforts swiftly shifted to a follow-up pontoon setup. The U.S. strategy aimed to lock in the eastern foothold, no matter the fate of the main crossing. Germany's counter to the lodgment drew whatever Hitler could scrape from his leftover forces, which in late March 1945 boiled down to makeshift combat teams pieced from broken regiments and support outfits. The Luftwaffe dwindled to a faint echo of its past power. With considerable force, the Germans unleashed a barrage of aerial assaults on the bridge. In the ensuing 10 days, U.S. intelligence tallied 367 distinct Luftwaffe missions aimed at the Remagen vicinity. The Allies countered by gathering the war's densest array of anti-aircraft defenses in Europe. 5 battalions equipped with hundreds of cannons formed a protective perimeter around the span. The ensuing flak engagements ranked among the fiercest clashes of the conflict. U.S. crews reported downing over 100 enemy planes during the period after the bridge's seizure. Desperate to obliterate it, the Germans turned to their cutting-edge innovations. Arado R-234 jet bombers, the globe's inaugural operational jets, struck in steep dives surpassing 800 km/h. Though tough for interceptors to catch, the jets' precision bombing at such velocities fell short. The majority of their payloads veered wide of the target. The Germans also committed the Messerschmitt Me-262, the pioneering operational jet fighter. Outpacing any Allied flyer, these machines embodied the pinnacle of German engineering prowess. Yet, superior tech couldn't surmount the core issues: scant numbers of planes, dwindling fuel supplies, and a shortage of seasoned aviators. While Hitler himself greenlit V-2 rocket strikes on the crossing, the sole instance these long-range arms targeted a battlefield objective. The V-2, a supersonic missile topping 5,000 km/h, had been crafted to sow panic in London, not pinpoint army assets. From Dutch pads 130 km distant, 11 such projectiles were fired toward Remagen. They claimed the lives of several U.S. troops and an indeterminable count of local German non-combatants. None struck the bridge. German commandos, dubbed frogmen, were dispatched along the Rhine. 7 underwater demolition experts, outfitted with Italian diving gear, attempted the sabotage. U.S. forces spotted them via canal defense lights, a classified system beaming powerful rays over the water. All 7 saboteurs perished or fell into custody. The enemy drifted explosive-packed vessels downstream, floated log-mimicking mines, and even hauled out the Karl Jarret, a massive 600mm siege howitzer launching shells beyond 2 tons apiece. Among history's heftiest guns, the Karl Jarret's rounds could raze bunkers outright, though its pinpoint accuracy suffered and repositioning dragged on for days. The sporadic blasts lobbed at the bridge all fell short. Far from demoralizing the Allies as Hitler hoped, this cascade of botched efforts bolstered U.S. spirits and exposed the Reich's frantic state. Troops holding the bridgehead realized they were beholding the Wehrmacht's final spasms. Captured Germans in the fray voiced gratitude that their ordeal had ended. Numerous had braced for futile orders to retake the site, doomed ventures they recognized as such. The Allied foothold beyond the Rhine shattered any lingering illusions of staving off utter collapse. The math was stark. With substantial U.S. units entrenched across the river, it no longer served as a bulwark. Every Wehrmacht unit tied down, quelling the Remagen salient, was one absent from blocking the colossal Allied offensives slated for late March. The German lines were fracturing under pressures they couldn't withstand. Major General Karl Wagner, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal Walter Model, delivered the sharpest post-war German verdict on Remagen's fallout. Securing the bridge heralded the Reich's doom. In interrogations, Wagner noted, the Remagen episode bred profound remorse and disgrace in the German high command. It proved the Allies held total command, leaving our troops merely responsive, unable to reclaim momentum. The botched demolition epitomized the utter unraveling of German leadership and coordination, the incapacity to carry out routine maneuvers, despite the officers' heritage of Prussian martial rigor. This debacle stung profoundly. It transcended a mere setback on the field. It signaled ethical disintegration. Evidence that the Wehrmacht, which had overrun Europe in 1940, had crumbled irreparably. The bridge gave way on March 17th at roughly 3 p.m. It had endured 10 days of strains beyond any designer's foresight. U.S. convoys had flowed ceaselessly, with thousands of vehicles traversing back and forth. German barrages had landed direct blows in close calls. Aerial barrages had inflicted mounting strain. The VI vibrations caused by explosions in the vicinity had weakened metal already worn out from years of service, compounded by the botched German attempt to destroy it on March 7th. Eyewitnesses described the sound of rivets bursting like gunfire in the lead-up to the downfall. A support hangar on the south arch broke first, followed by a second. The central section rose momentarily before plummeting into the Rhine with a thunderous crash audible for kilometers. 28 U.S. combat engineers perished in the incident, alongside more than 60 wounded. The majority belonged to the 276th Engineer Combat Battalion, engaged in repair efforts right at the time of the catastrophe. The tragedy carried a sharp irony. These soldiers, who had preserved the structure through urgent efforts to neutralize German explosives, now lost their lives because their fixes proved insufficient against the buildup of structural harm. Yet, when the bridge finally gave way, its tactical value had already faded. U.S. combat engineers had erected 2 temporary bridges and were nearing completion on a third. Pontoon, treadway, and Bailey spans now stretched across the Rhine at various spots close to Remagen. Over 25,000 American soldiers had traversed the impaired Ludendorff Bridge prior to its demise. Following the collapse, the flow of troops actually accelerated as the new spans managed greater volumes of movement. By March 25th, 18 days after seizing the bridgehead, more than 125,000 U.S. personnel had forded the Rhine near Remagen. 6 full divisions, complete with tanks, guns, and logistics convoys, had secured positions beyond the waterway. The foothold extended 8 miles deep by 25 miles across. It encompassed 11 kilometers of the vital Autobahn, linking the Ruhr industrial zone to Frankfurt. U.S. units were poised for a thrust into Germany's core. The push from the Remagen bridgehead commenced on March 25th. Armored outfits, previously hemmed in by the tight perimeter, surged forward explosively. Combat Command B of the 9th Armored Division traversed 108 kilometers in one day. Combat Command A pushed 110 kilometers in just 11 hours. German opposition, intense within the cramped area around the bridge, dissolved over the broader expanse. Whole enemy formations capitulated to avoid destruction. On March 29th, Combat Command A took over 2,200 captives in a lone clash. The U.S. Momentum grew so swift that German leaders struggled to monitor their own forces. Field Marshal Model's Army Group B, which started with roughly 325,000 troops ahead of the Remagen surge, started to unravel. Units became isolated from central commands. Corps lost ties to army leadership. The organizational framework that had sustained the Wehrmacht across 5 years of conflict was fracturing. The fallout rippled across Germany's fortified lines. Field Marshal Model oversaw an army group tasked with blocking the Remagen incursion, curbing U.S. breakthroughs from additional Rhine sites, and averting the Ruhr's isolation, all unattainable with the manpower at hand. The Ruhr, the nation's manufacturing core supplying 80% of its coal and steel, faced imminent severance. Model recognized that forfeiting the Ruhr would doom any chance of sustaining wartime output. Devoid of coal and steel, the Wehrmacht couldn't replenish troops, power tanks, or produce shells. The Remagen Bridge's failure set the stage for the Ruhr's capture. Losing the Ruhr signaled the conflict's conclusion. By March 31st, 3 weeks post the Ludendorff seizure, all 4 American armies on the Western Front had surmounted the Rhine. What Allied strategists expected to demand complex water assaults, heavy losses, and prolonged battles unfolded with remarkable swiftness. The Rhine. Eisenhower summed up the triumph's scale in his recollections. "We were across the Rhine on a permanent bridge," he noted. The classic bulwark guarding Germany's interior stood breached. The enemy's ultimate route, projected for the 1945 spring and summer pushes, now loomed immediate in our thoughts. This U.S. view resonated internationally. Reporters proclaimed the war trimmed by months. Britain's Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, whose meticulous Operation Plunder Rhine operation paled beside the Remagen feat, conceded its pivotal role. From the east, Soviet officers, eyeing the Allies' quick gains, hastened their drives to claim Berlin. The contest for Germany turned into a dash, ignited at Remagen. Military historians provided diverse evaluations regarding the extent to which the bridge's destruction had accelerated the conflict's conclusion. Certain experts asserted it trimmed weeks off the timeline, while others contended it shaved away months. In reality, exact figures proved unattainable, as the tactical repercussions were interconnected and holistic, not straightforward. Securing the bridge didn't just accelerate the Allies' schedule, it profoundly reshaped the Germans' operational possibilities. Prior to Remagen, German leaders envisioned maintaining control of the Rhine until April and perhaps extending into May, leveraging that interval to bolster fortifications near Berlin and pursue a distinct accord with the Western Allies, enabling a focused effort against the Soviets. Following Remagen, those projections turned into delusions. The Rhine surrendered 3 weeks earlier than anticipated. Reserves intended for repelling Montgomery's northern incursion were squandered in desperate bids to eradicate the Remagen foothold. The morale blow to German soldiers proved immeasurable, yet ruinous. Colonel A.F. Russell Lyons, the lead engineer whose unit seized and secured the bridge, reckoned that retaining it intact spared the Allies 2 months of combat and around 35,000 lives lost. He derived this from juxtaposing the Remagen traversal with the boat-based assaults necessary at alternative Rhine sites. At Basel, where Montgomery's Operation Plunder took place, British and American troops gathered more than 2,000 artillery units, executed complex parachute insertions, and endured heavy tolls despite their vast edge. In contrast, at Remagen, U.S., troops forded the river with light losses, as the existing span obviated the riskiest element of any waterway assault, the initial assault craft phase. Historian Ken Heckler, drawing from thorough after-action discussions with combatants on both sides, determined that taking the Ludendorff Bridge substantially quickened the war's resolution. Additional scholars posited that the feat curtailed the hostilities by about 6 months. These differing projections stemmed from varied analytical approaches and premises, yet the overall agreement was unmistakable. Remagen marked a pivotal shift. The toll in lives from seizing and protecting the bridge offers yet another gauge of its importance, USC's. Losses during the Remagen engagement and the ensuing clashes in the salient reached roughly 860 fatalities, with close to 5,700 injured and a comparable figure unaccounted for. These figures represented severe sacrifices, yet they clustered within the initial 18 days of action, spanning March 7th to March 25th. German losses over that span surpassed 11,700 captives, plus fatalities and injuries that evaded precise records, but undoubtedly topped 10,000. This asymmetry underscored the stark asymmetry in capabilities. The Americans enjoyed dominance in the skies, firepower, mechanized units, and the mental boost of inevitable triumph. The Germans faced mandates to launch offensives they couldn't execute, deteriorating gear, and an intensifying awareness that defeat loomed. The putting to death of the German commanders blamed for the bridge's fall tainted the armed forces' ethical standards. Major Hans Helmuth Scheller was a 31-year-old professional soldier who had excelled in service across both the Eastern and Western theaters. Married with small children, he would never witness maturing. His offense consisted of reaching the site 2 hours prior to its fall and being unable to work wonders with 36 fatigued troops against thousands of Americans backed by armor and barrages. Lieutenant Karl Prumers served as a specialist endeavoring to safeguard classified gear from seizure. His killing proceeded in spite of evidence that he adhered to directives prioritizing the retention of cutting-edge tech. Majors Keitel, Kraft, and Strobel adhered to routine protocols in readying explosive setups. None among the quartet merited execution. Each served as a fall guy for a regime unraveling from its leadership. Post-war, General der Artillerie Rudolf Hübner, who oversaw the hasty tribunal, faced trial in German courts and received a 4-year term for his part in the unlawful killings. Though lenient for such miscarriages of justice, the verdict affirmed that amid Germany's bleakest moments, certain officers acknowledged the proceedings as a farce. Any ultimate judgment on Remagen's weightiness ought to encompass its influence on Allied deliberations over terminating the war. Before Remagen, substantive talks considered pausing at the Rhine, permitting the Soviets to shoulder the primary burden of Germany's ultimate downfall. Certain British and American strategists maintained that pushing beyond the Rhine would incur steep costs, and Eastern Soviet advances could achieve parallel aims at lower expense to Western troops. Remagen rendered that discussion irrelevant. With U.S. elements already over the Rhine and broadening their salient, any pause lacked tactical merit. The drive forward needed to keep its pace. That swift push from the Rhine to the Elbow River, completed in a bit more than 4 weeks, proved the wisdom of that choice. U.S. troops linked up with Soviet units at Toga on April 25th, effectively splitting Germany apart. By May 8th, the nation had capitulated without conditions. Seizing the bridge carried implications far wider than the tactical battlefield. Back in the United States, reports of the feat arrived in the Senate during a live debate. Officials paused their ban on clapping as lawmakers rose to their feet in applause. Headlines in papers nationwide proclaimed the European conflict's conclusion within reach. Purchases of war bonds skyrocketed. The boost to civilian spirits proved immense. Following prolonged fighting and countless losses in the tens of thousands, triumph at last felt real and imminent. Within Germany, word of the bridge's fall circulated among troops and ordinary folks, sapping their resolve. Propaganda had assured them the Rhine stood unbreakable, that invading forces would crash futilely into its barriers. Learning the Rhine had been traversed with relative ease, that one bridge endured due to a mix of U.S. fortune and German disarray, shattered the slim trust left in the leadership's abilities. The ruins of the Ludendorff Bridge offer their silent narrative. Post-war, the framework saw no restoration. Debris of mangled metal and shattered rock got removed from the Rhine, yet the pillars on each shoreline endured. Those on the West Bank later transformed into a museum honoring peace. The Freiredens Museum, Brick von Maragen. Displays inside chronicle the bridge's past from building to ruin, emphasizing the March 1945 clash and its aftermath. On the East Bank, the towers now host venues for artistic performances. This shift from conflict to culture stands intentional, underscoring how ruin yields to renewal. Those who took the bridge earned honors fitting their exploits. Lieutenant Karl Timberman gained the Distinguished Service Cross, the country's runner-up medal for courage. Sergeant Alex Drabick claimed identical acclaim. Scores of troops from the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion and the 14th Tank Battalion picked up Silver Stars and Bronze Stars. Brigadier General William Hoger advanced in rank and assumed leadership of a corps. The whole 9th Armored Division merited a Presidential Unit citation for its role at Remagen. Such tributes acknowledged personal and group valor, yet fell short of grasping the event's deeper weight. The fighters who traversed the span amid gunfire didn't just claim a strategic goal, they helped forge a turning point in the conflict's path. Each day the war dragged on cost thousands of lives, soldier and citizen alike. The warriors at Remagen played a key part in averting that toll. The Remagen tale prompts deep inquiries into Luck's place in the past. Had the mist not cleared at that precise instant, might U.S. patrols have spotted the bridge prior to its demolition? Had the wiring for explosives worked as intended, could the structure have collapsed with Americans atop it? Had Major Scheller shown up 2 hours sooner, might he have rallied defenses to stall the invaders? Had Hitler not mandated clearing the charges post-Cologne, would the Rayern detonators have been set and operational? Every such query hints at an alternate path, one where the bridge fell and the Rhine breach followed the planned Allied schedule. The cluster claiming the Ludendorff Bridge stemmed from humans operating amid intense pressure and peril. Lieutenant Timman guiding his unit over a span liable to burst any time. Sergeant Drake dashing to the far shore as enemy guns blazed. The sappers toiling amid shots to neutralize the blast loads. The armored teams delivering suppressive fire from the near bank. The planners who spotted the chance and ordered its grasp. The leaders who rerouted vast formations to capitalize on the gap. Every figure in this sequence chose actions that drove the result. Yank out one element, and the end could have shifted. Acknowledging such personal influence amid grand tides of time is what renders the account gripping. The figures at Remagen weren't mere pieces in fate's game, but shapers who molded history via their coup-furian choices. In March 2025, the 80th anniversary of seizing the bridge was observed through memorial events in Remagen and across the United States. Groups of veterans, historical associations, and army outfits connected to the 9th Armored Division joined in tributes to the troops who battled at the site. Officials from the German administration recognized the engagement's importance, highlighting the toll of conflict and the worth of harmony. These observances captured the multifaceted heritage of the occurrence. To Americans, it represented a peak of victory, affirming bravery and bold command. To Germans, it served as a recollection of loss, yet also of freedom from Nazi rule. To scholars, it offered an example of how chance and inevitability intertwine in combat. To everyone involved, it underscored how personal choices amid turmoil can alter the path of events. The troops who took the Remagen Bridge had no idea their efforts would inspire literature, movies, and scholarly analyses. They were merely fulfilling their obligations under conditions no one desired. That their responsibilities resulted in consequences of global import stands as evidence of war's erratic essence and the lasting role of valor.